everybody, if anyone ever uttered the words to you, dream garage or ultimate man cave, I'm sure you, as I often do, imagine a palace of mirror, quartz and multi-million-dollar exotics, a 21st century bat cave. But my friend Jay has a dream garage of a very, very different kind, and one that I think is infinitely cooler, because from the outside it looks like nothing at all, your ordinary, average, everyday single garage. But open the door and in it you will find a single car stacker, and on one level a Lamborghini Countach, the other a Ferrari 512BB. I've driven the Countach before, and today I get to try the Ferrari. This is going to be good. You know, it's a little bit mad. Today I have done 2 reviews. This morning I filmed a 2015 Jaguar XES, a perfectly decent, in fact, very, very good saloon car from about 10 years ago. And that makes almost the same amount of power and torque as this, which in 1979, this was one of the fastest cars in the world. Yeah, this and the Countach traded blows for dominance of the all-important bedroom poster segment for teenage boys for a long, long time. Which is your favourite? Please head into the comment section and tell me. I gotta be honest, I think for a lot of people, they don't picture this when they think of the Countach's rival. Instead, they'll think of this car's successor, the Testarossa, certainly a more iconic machine. But today, I'm going to be telling you why I think the 512BB deserves a little bit more recognition. The story starts in the 1960s. This was a time of great change for the automobile because, let's be honest here, many cars of the 1950s were built using technology that wasn't really significantly more advanced than that we had before the Second World War. But by the time the end of the 50s and the start of the 60s had occurred, all of that development and that advancement that had happened during the conflict had started to filter down into the everyday automobile. And, perhaps more importantly, rationing had come to an end for most people, and now they had money, and they wanted to spend it. The swinging 60s had begun, and now it was cool to flash some cash. But things in the sports car world, they were a-changing. And as is often the case, this change started not on the road, but on the racetrack, when one man, John Cooper, realised that the best place for an engine in a race car wasn't the front, but the middle. It gave it a superior polar moment of inertia, better weight distribution, and better packaging. This was to become increasingly crucial as aerodynamics then began to play a part over the next few decades. But on the road, people were a little more hesitant, and indeed, even Enzo Ferrari himself thought that to build a mid-engine road car would be suicide for any wannabe race driver. And so, he stuck very firmly to his format of front-engined rear-wheel drive. But not everybody felt the same way, and so, by the end of the 60s, the mid-engined road car was a reality, with manufacturers from the likes of Lotus and the Europa to, more worryingly for Ferrari, Lamborghini, and the iconic and drop-dead gorgeous Miura. And of course, everybody knows that Ferrari's first mid-engine offering was the Dino 246. Only that wasn't ever officially a Ferrari. They built it and they sold it from their dealerships, but it did not wear the prancing horse. Instead, if you wanted something from Maranello, at the time, their flagship was the 365 Daytona. But the engineers at Maranello did not want to be caught napping, and so in 1973 they gave to the world their mid-engined offering, the slightly confusingly named 365 GT4 BB. BB allegedly standing for Berlinetta Boxer, though just about everybody will of course tell you it is not a true boxer. What's the difference? Well, in a boxer, two opposing pistons go in like that, like boxers punching each other. But in this, a flat V, they move kind of like that. It is technically speaking a 180-degree V12, if you'd like to call it that. Flat engine, yes. Boxer, no. And of course, this being Ferrari, it was all about that engine. And for the 365 GT4 BB, you'd have found in the back a 4.4 litre flat 12, making 344 horsepower and allegedly derived from the unit in their Formula One car of the day. That car wound up being in production for a relatively short time, from just 1973 until 1976, with fewer than 400 ever being sold. But in the context of many of these things, that isn't actually all that unusual. They were very, very expensive, finance wasn't really a thing, and at the time there was an oil crisis to deal with too. So, in 1976, Ferrari unveiled its successor, the BB512, or as it's later become known, the 512BB. And in case you were wondering, many moons after the cars had finished production, a couple of engineers finally admitted that BB didn't stand for Berlinetta Boxer. It never did. Everybody knew it wasn't a boxer. Instead, it stood for Brigitte Bardot, because they thought the cars were that beautiful. And I have to say, I kind of see what they were thinking. They're gorgeous, these. Nice, low-slung, wide, aggressive-looking, shark-like things. Controversial though it might be, I think this might actually be a prettier car than the Countach. That is the ultimate statement. It is the ultimate supercar, I'll never argue it. But these, they're criminally underrated. And the funny thing is, this car, though it does look pretty big when it's on its own, it's actually not. It's 4.5 meters long, just over 1.8 meters wide, so it occupies the same floor space as a modern day Boxster. So what changed for this new 512 over the 365? At a quick glance, you wouldn't think all that much, and the easiest way to tell them is the front end. Where the 365 is pretty flat, this has a rather low, as I've just found out, little chin spoiler, which stops the front end lifting. Apparently, on the old car, the front would rise by up to an inch at high speed. Very early attempt at aerodynamics, but it did work. The other easy way to tell one of these, apart from the earlier 365, is to look at the back. Those have 3 taillights and 3 exhausts on each side. With this, a far more modest pair. And I think this does look better. 3 exhausts on each side is just silly. It's not max power Ferrari, come on. The car has knacker ducts on the side for improved cooling, the engine is dry sumped, and the clutch was uprated too. The gearbox in these is a 5-speed manual, with no automatic ever being offered, and the configuration of the whole thing was always a little bit odd. You'd think that a flat engine was flat for better weight distribution, and in a Formula One car maybe it is. But not here, because that big old lump of an engine sits on top of the gearbox. You can sort of feel it in the bends too. It's, even at low speeds, a little wallowy. But I've got to say, compared to the Countach, and I won't be drawing too many comparisons between the two, I drove that a long time ago and it's a much later car, but this is much easier. Still doesn't have power steering, so at low speeds is a bit of a workout. The tyres here are 215 wide at the front and 225 at the back, so marginally wider at the rear than the 365 as well. The engine grew in capacity from 4.4 litres to 4.9, though Ferrari often build it as a 5 litre, and originally they said it made more power too, 360 horses, but later they quietly revised that down to about 340. It also had a slightly lower redline than the older car, with peak power now being made at 6,200 rather than 7,000, and it also had a bit more torque across the rev range too, with its peak now being 331 pounds-feet. That's just shy of 450 Newton meters. The suspension is double wishbone at all 4 corners, with the car having just the single damper on each side at the back, and the later 512 BBI having a pair. Visibility, I must say, is absolutely excellent. Dogleg first, so reverse is push down and then left and up. Really quite a fabulous thing, this. This sort of thing is not easy at all. The clutch is quite grabby and very, very heavy, unsurprisingly unassisted. But once you're on the move, honestly, it's fine. The 512BB was in production until 1981, and this sold a little bit better than its predecessor, with over 900 of them finding a home, of which 101 were right-hand drive examples. Its first owner actually specified a 365, but when he found out this was coming, changed his order over. It was originally Verde Medio, a green colour, nice light green. It looks quite good actually, but like many of the period, whoever bought it once upon a time decided that it was a Ferrari and therefore it should be red. Somehow, it also has Ferrari Classic A certification, and I thought they were quite picky about things like a car having original colour, but apparently not. In any case, it is in sensational condition, even having a correct toolkit for it, and that is quite sexy, and something that Jay had to buy because at some point in time the original had been lost. Even the engine bay is immaculate, and though he hasn't had it all that long, he's already put 500 miles on it and clearly is very keen to use it. He's brought it to a show where I had a stand, and today he's letting me have a go. And I've got to say, I'm really enjoying this. Like all old supercars, it is a little bit of hard work, but it's also massively enjoyable. And though I doubt I've even troubled the speed limit thus far, I'm having a whale of a time. The final generation of BB, the BBI, then landed in 1981, and as you might guess from the name, the big change was a move to fuel injection, though, as was again common for the era, that meant it made even less power. This then soldiered on for another few years until the introduction of its successor, the Testarossa. When that happened, the engine was carried over, but with upgrades and improvements, but significant alterations were made to the chassis. And one of the reasons for the Testarossa's distinctive looks are the fact that here, the radiators are at the front, and many customers complained that made the car rather warm. I've got to say that right now I'm not feeling that too much, but that might be because it's a nice cool evening in Britain and it's about 14 or 15 degrees. It's not 35 degrees in traffic in Miami. Solving that problem meant moving the radiators to the side, which made the car wider. It also necessitated a large opening to feed them, but rules and regs at the time meant you couldn't have a nice large opening on the side of your car, and that is how those iconic side strakes came to be. But we're not here to talk about the Testarossa, we're here to talk about the 512BB. And how does it feel? Well, pretty good. The first thing you notice, other than the really heavy clutch and steering, is how small it feels. You've got an amazing view of that bonnet out the front. At the side you can just see those beautiful haunches, and doesn't this car look just incredible? It is only when you really get to see it in person and spend some time looking at it, you realise how intricate it all is. And it is details like those big fat rear arches that really make it stand out. At a quick glance, I know it is very easy to say that this just looks like a 308, but it doesn't. That has a far more angular side profile, but look at the side of this. It's more curved, more elegant, a little more 1960s, a little less 1970s. Inside though, it is very much 1970s with classic orange on black dials, nice old school toggles, again as you would have got in the 308, and this big classic Ferrari gated shifter. The steering wheel is a Momo Prototipo, feels beautiful in the hands, and these seats are absolutely spectacular. Not really anything in the way of side support, but they're actually quite comfy. Headroom though isn't so great. I've had to recline the seat a fair bit to get comfortable, but I can still drive this in my regular shoes, and I am enjoying it. But I know what you're thinking. That's all well and good, James, but what's it like when you put your foot down? Shall we find out? It may have the same power as a sort of decent hot hatch of today, but there is something about old school power that just doesn't compare. This thing is awesome. Put your foot down, and you need to put it all the way down. You feel the back squat down, the front lift, you hear it take a big gulp of air, and then it just pushes you towards the horizon. As the revs build, so does the power, and this thing has a really impressive turn of pace. I happen to suspect it's also got a very, very optimistic speedo, because I've got a fairly good sense of exactly how fast I'm going in a car, and this I think does overread a fair bit. But that was common of Ferrari speedos for quite some time until after this car was made. There are just three fairly basic stalks here, one for the indicators, one for the lights, which I might actually use in a moment, and one for the wipe wash. As I'm sure is blindingly obvious, no parking sensors, cameras, or anything else like that. In fact, this doesn't even appear to have a radio. It is absolutely easier to live with than the Countach. Certainly feels considerably softer. When you start to pile on that speed, you do feel the chassis go a little bit loose. The steering certainly has a lot more slack in it. The Countach is all rose jointed and everything, and does feel a lot tighter in the bends. This, with its big, huge profile side tyres and the slightly more comfort orientated suspension, there isn't what you'd call play in the system. That's not fair or accurate, but there is just a little moment while everything waits up. However, even from low RPM, this thing's got some real pull. Let's get those lights on. Yes! Oh, I feel like a hero in this thing. Yep, rev match, nice and easy. Beautiful soundtrack, this too. Very, very different to any Ferrari V12, certainly later ones. There we go. Now, I don't think this has a rev limiter in it, so I'm being very, very cautious with it, but that was nearly all the way. I want you to get your value for money after all. And I know Jay enjoys seeing his car being driven. We've yet to do the drive-bys just to get the timing right. I'm driving now because it'll get dark in here first, and then we're going to do the drive-bys in about half an hour, and hopefully we'll just catch the sun as it sets. We'll get some really pretty shots for you. The brakes are assisted. The feel of the pedal is pretty decent. There's a little bit of movement before they start to act, but they're actually quite intuitive, fairly nice. Ultimate stopping power, though, is definitely going to be limited compared to just about anything modern. It can get the speed up. Getting it down takes a bit more effort. Once you do start to press on, steering does then weighten up again, but though it has weight, it doesn't have huge amounts of what I might term feel. It's a bit of guesswork here, and when you come into a bend, it's not massively happy about turning. And when you do come into a bend, put your foot on the brake, you feel almost certain that that front end is just going to start scraping the floor to scrub the speed off, sort of Flintstone style. It doesn't though, and it hasn't, and I'm very glad that it hasn't. Around town, second feels very appropriate, doing just over 2,000 and a bit RPM, but it doesn't sound like the engine's working too hard. Gearbox is quite heavy, many of them in this period were, but it's fine. A classic gated shifter. Doesn't click-clack as some of the later ones do. Between the visibility and the width though, I'm very, very confident piloting this car around town. If you were to tell me I had to drive this into London right now, I wouldn't have too many issues. It's the clutch that'd be the biggest one. Both this and the Countach I drove were on carburetors, and this certainly feels a little better set up. It hasn't coughed on me too much, even when I've asked quite a bit of it at low RPM. Feels very, very well set up and just massively tractable. So it's things like this that make me laugh when you talk to somebody who had an old 3-litre Capri back in the day and they say, oh yeah, that was the fastest thing on the road, that. Now the fact is, you're almost certain never in 1978 to have encountered one of these. But if you did, and the owner actually was racing you, I tell you, your Capri, not a chance, mate. This is quick now. And here's the daftest thing. I know what you're thinking. All right, James, yeah, cool. You like it. Classic Ferrari. It's going to cost a lot of money, isn't it? A Countach is, what, 400, 500,000 pounds for a really nice one, going up to more for the early, very rare ones. How much is this then? It's a rare Ferrari. They made just over 2,300 of all BB variants. What are we talking? $500,000 to start? No, we're not. Despite the fact that I think it's maybe even more important than the Testarossa being the first genuine mid-engine Ferrari, made in much smaller numbers too. There's something like a quarter of the number of these on the road as compared with the Testarossa. These don't really command much of a premium. An exact price? Well, it's hard to tell you, but this one went to auction and didn't sell. Jay, they managed to pick it up afterwards in a private deal. How much is it worth? I don't know, because I didn't ask him, but I'd wager somewhere between 200 to 300,000 pounds. And although £250,000 is not small money in anybody's books, that is also the same amount of money that today you would have to spend to get into a Dino, for a car that, I remind you, in its day had half the cylinder count of this, an engine built by Fiat, and a badge that wasn't Ferrari. And yes, I know, I've seen the Jason Camissa video on Dino, Honor or Shame, all that stuff. It's a very, very good video. I like Jason Camissa a lot. He is one of my favourite YouTubers, and the Haggerty channel is amazing. But, fact remains, Dino's a Dino, Ferrari's a Ferrari. And they definitely sold more Dinos than they did 512s. How many of those remain compared to these? Well, that's where things may get a little more complicated. But it just shouldn't be the case that a Dino costs more than one of these. But it is. They are, though, likely on account of the rarity, more money than a Testarossa, and you could argue, I think successfully, that that is the truly iconic car. That was a first gear, foot flat pull. It gripped. Very impressed. Weirdly, for these, on the rears, though yes, the tyre is marginally bigger than it was before, the main change was to the wheel, where it went from 7.5 inches to 9, effectively giving you a wider track and stretching it a little bit. The later cars, you could even get the option of simply a wider tyre, but that went on the same wheel. Don't ask. And handily, unlike the BBI, these don't use the Michelin TRX metric tyres, meaning they're a little bit easier to get. They're instead Michelin XWXs. And I have now driven Countach, Testarossa, and the 512BB. Which would I have? Well, it'd be unfair to choose a favourite. If I was going to put one in my lounge, I think it'd have to be the Countach. If I was going to make a movie with one, it'd be the Testarossa every day of the week. But if I was going to take another one out for a drive, go up to Scotland, visit some of my favourite roads, it would be this. There's even, just about, enough room in the front for a couple of bags. And at the end of the Countach review, I felt like I'd been in a sauna. In this, nothing of the sort. It's not an easy drive, but it's nowhere near as demanding. And yet, it's still rewarding. You want to know something though? When you have finished driving and quiet descends, you go to get out and go, I did nearly have to call for help. It's here. I like the 512BB a lot. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Jay for bringing it out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.